Welcome to Huff Goes to the Movies. My name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Some people know that I love going to the movies. Scream 6 is in theaters now. It opened up as the #1 film in America this weekend with a franchise record $44.5 million. It immediately was fast-tracked into production after the success of Scream 5 just last year. There were some disputes going into the production of this film, most notably Neve Campbell, who had been the franchise lead going all the way back to the original film, decided to not return for the 6th installment due to a pay dispute. And while that left a pretty sour taste in the mouths of a lot of fans, I do think that Scream 5 really laid the foundation for this franchise to continue with a younger generation of characters, most notably the core 4, as they are sort of dubbed in this film. So Melissa Barrera is back, Jenna Ortega is back, Jasmin Savoy Brown, Mason Gooding. They are all back in this film, and even Courteney Cox reprises her role as Gail, though she is not as big of a presence in this film. And even Hayden Panettiere, who became a fan favorite in Scream 4, her character, Kirby, is back as well. And on top of that, there is a whole new ensemble of characters here. Tony Revolori, Samara Weaving, Liana Liberato, Jack Champion, Dermot Mulroney, Devyn Nekoda, Josh Segarra. I mean, when it comes to films like this that require a high body count, you need a pretty expansive cast, and Scream 6 definitely delivers on that. It also has the return of Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, who are sort of best known as the duo Radio Silence. They are back in the director's chair for this one as well, picking up the baton that Wes Craven left after the 4th film and really turning this franchise into their own. I guess I might as well start with the positives. I think that Scream 6 is a solid entry in the series. I think that taking these events outside of Woodsboro was a good change of pace, on top of the fact that we're following a younger generation of characters. Melissa Barrera was really sort of made to be the lead of Scream 5. She is sort of a new take on the final girl, and I think that in this film, she actually turns in an even better performance as Samantha Carpenter. Jenna Ortega, who was a real standout in the previous film, along with Jasmin Savoy Brown. They are also very good here, but it is the elevation of the performances of Melissa Barrera and Mason Gooding, on top of the already great work that Jasmin Savoy Brown and Jenna Ortega were doing, that really makes Scream 6 its own thing. I mean, while this is not the first or the second installment in the franchise to leave Woodsboro, this is the first time that I have watched one of these films and thought to myself, oh wow, like, we may never go back to Woodsboro. Yes, we will have references to what happened in previous films. We will, have characters who are sort of informed by decisions that they may have made in previous films. But for the first time ever, Scream feels like it could go anywhere locations-wise. As far as the tropes, those are here to stay. And I think that when you're taking a slasher franchise, especially, that has been going for so long, you need directors who are willing to dial things up just a bit. And I think one of the things that Scream 6 delivers on is the promise that the cast and crew have been telling us for a year, in that this is probably the goriest installment yet. The camera lingers on these attacks. There are moments where the camera is just fixated on where the knife enters the human body, and our victims get their, I don't want to say glory shots, but we sort of get those shots of them just losing life. We get to see little bits of human flesh and human insides creep out. And while these films have always been very violent, it was a little bit of an adjustment to see the camera fixate on that violence in this one. I think it adds a great effect here. I mean, we've gotten so many slasher movies, and with Halloween being rebooted and Scream being rebooted and lots of classic films sort of having been remade over the last decade plus, I mean, you gotta turn it up somehow. And I think that this film definitely delivers on the kills. They are quite inventive, and the fact that this is taking place in New York City, they do take advantage of some of the unique locations and circumstances where people might find themselves becoming victims. But when it comes to how this progresses the events of the previous film, I would say that Scream 6 is the best immediate follow-up entry in the franchise. There are some other sequels that I like more, but I think that similar to Scream 2, which is very much taking place a year after the events of the original film, it's got a lot of the same characters, and it is sort of addressing to the audience that, oh, this is a horror sequel, so now things are going to be a little bit different. I think story-wise, Scream 6 does an even better job of taking the events that happened in the previous installment and turning the story into a continuation of that. It's not just another series of murder and, oh my god, here we go again, but the story here is very much informed by what happened in that previous film and what we have not really been able to see in the interim. Samantha, for example, is someone who is now a person of interest because there is dispute, there is controversy, there are people who believe that she might have been the mastermind of what happened in Scream 5, and she is left having to deal with the public perception of herself, while Jenna Ortega's character, Tara, is not really that concerned. And I think that this adds a level of depth to characters in this series that we usually don't get. Other than Sydney and Dewey, we rarely get a lot of depth in these characters. They are playing on personality, and it works. I mean, as fans of slashers, if you have a good enough personality, if you have something that is magnetic, something that is charming, something that is charismatic or jumps off the screen, then it kind of works, and the depth, we can take it or leave it. This is really the first time I can really place or really figure that characters not named Sidney Prescott or Dewey actually have real depth to them. And there are so many other factors that they need to consider when it comes to how they navigate in the real world. It's not just that Ghostface is after them, but now the world has a perception of who they are, and people are going to interact with them based on those preconceived notions. I think that Scream 6 does a lot of things well, but like most slasher films, this is one where the plot is being driven by a series of conveniences and a series of necessities. So, for instance, we do have plenty of moments where characters address why someone should not make a certain choice because this is what will lead to their demise. And then minutes later, those characters are making the choices that they just said they would not make. And look, it's a slasher film. We need a body count. So people need to be in peril. I get that. But then we have other instances where people are attacked, people are stabbed, things happen to their body that should not be happening to their body. And they don't necessarily stay down. They just kind of keep moving. And when it comes to characters like Michael Myers, who can just sort of be stabbed repeatedly, who can be shot at, who can be beat over the head, but they keep getting up, we as the audience kind of buy into it because Michael Myers is the ultimate bad guy, so we kind of go with it, and that franchise has always played on that line of, is Michael Myers human? Is he more than human? But in a franchise like Scream, where that's never the case, it is odd to see characters endure this much, but to still somehow be able to get up and walk it off. I think that some people may roll their eyes at who makes it out of this movie alive versus who doesn't, but when you have a story that is rooted in characters that you like, and one that is attempting to subvert expectations based on 5 previous films, I think that the payoff might be worth it. And certainly, Scream 6 does have some flaws, but I think overall, this is one that just has a different energy to it, one that has a little bit more depth to it, and one that is rooted in rooting for characters in a way that we previously haven't. I mean, I can't really think, other than maybe the first 2 films, having multiple characters that you immediately are like, oh yeah, I want them to live. I do not want anything bad to happen to them. And without giving too much away about who survives and who does not, I think that Scream 6 really does understand that when it comes to slashers and when it comes to franchises like this that have long-running legacies, if you can't have the original characters around for very long, you should make sure that the audience is willing to go along with the newer characters that you established. And Scream 5 did a great job of establishing Tara and Sam and Mindy and Chad. But I think that Scream 6 doubles down on that. I mean, I feel like this is absolutely maybe the best character work of any of the Scream films other than the original. It's definitely a good time. I think if you're a fan of the franchise, you'll definitely dig this one. I can't imagine why a casual viewer would walk into Scream 6. I mean, at this point, if you're not already on board this train, why would you get on at this stop? But for people who may find themselves in a theater for Scream 6 who are not already sort of in the know, they'll probably enjoy the kills, and they probably won't think about the movie for much longer than that. Oh, that's right, the Neve Campbell part. So all of that controversy aside, this film, much like Creed 3, does as great of a job as possible of not having the main character involved, but having a story that makes sense regardless. Creed 3 does not involve Rocky Balboa at all, but it's a story about Creed. It is a story very much about what he's gone through in his life and things that he needs to overcome. Scream 6, while involving the Ghostface killer and all of the tropes that we know and love, the fact that Sydney is not in this film, it is something that is very briefly addressed, and it makes sense as to why she is not here. The story is able to continue in a way that makes sense. The story is able to have a sense of depth, a sense of purpose. It makes sense relative to all the events that have happened in the previous films. All of those things track even without Sydney or without Neve Campbell here. I miss Neve Campbell. I think she's great. She's my favorite final girl. But I think that Scream 6 works even better because it doesn't have Sidney Prescott in it. Before I get into some more spoilery things, I will simply say that Scream 6 is a good time, not a great time. I think that the New York setting really works here. I think that the character work here is really well carved out, and I think that this lays a foundation for Scream being able to do different things should they continue the franchise. That being said, there are a few too many plot conveniences, and I think that the third act is a little sloppy, but when you have really good kills, really good characters, and some truly hilarious bits, it's something that it's easy to overlook. So Scream 6, if I had to give it a rating, I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. But now we get into the more fun part of this video, which is my ranking of the Scream series. There have been 6 films, so I will go from number 6 all the way to number 1. Let's waste no more time. Number 6, quite obviously the weakest entry in the series, Scream 3. Now, I know some people who have a bit more love for Scream 3 than I do, and I think it's a decent movie, but when you remember sort of where this entry could have gone, where the storyline could have gone, and where it ended up, there was a lot of controversy that the studio wanted to avoid, so they rewrote the script, they took it in a different direction, and what we got was mostly forgettable, but nothing super offensive. I think that this has one of the better openings of any of these movies, and I think that it establishes the stakes in a way that makes this far more interesting than where it actually ends up. So, the bottom of the list, it's Scream 3. At number 5, Scream 4. This one was the last film that this was the last Scream film that Wes Craven directed. Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, they all came back. This is the film that introduced us to Officer Judy. This was actually shot not too far from here. It was shot in Ann Arbor and in the suburbs of Metro Detroit. So it is funny to spot out certain locations that I recognize. This film definitely introduced a few characters that fans of the franchise really do enjoy. I did mention Officer Judy. It also introduced Hayden Panettiere as Kirby. She's great. And really, I think this is one of those reboots that probably is going to become more forgettable because they would later reboot the franchise again, and it seems like they're sort of staying the course with that. So this entry feels a little bit more forgettable just because it seems like not as much of this film is really going to stick as far as where the franchise may go. But I really like this film quite a bit. I like how they play on the killer and the motive here. And I think Emma Roberts actually does a lot of good work with that reveal and how she plays that. Coming in at number 4, Scream 6. Now, this might seem like a really low rating, but as I was explaining to a friend of mine the other day, I think that my ranking of this could easily go up with another watch. I very much enjoy Scream 6. I think that this probably has the best continuation of any of the films as far as how it relates to the film that preceded it. I love the use of this the location of New York City. I really enjoy how they use the characters in this film, but also that third act is just a little too sloppy, and I think that the plot has a little too many conveniences to really sort of land in the top half of this list. But that being said, I do really enjoy it, and I recommend it for people who are fans of the Scream series. Coming in at number 3, Scream 5. This is sort of the requel as it is described in the movie. This introduces us to a whole new generation of characters in Woodsboro. Jenna Ortega is a real standout in this film, as is Jasmin Savoy Brown. They introduce us to the idea of Billy Loomis having a daughter, and I do have to admit, I didn't really want him to go, but the way that they take out Dewey in this film, as heartbreaking as it is, I think that signals that this franchise was ready to evolve, ready to move forward. I think that while it does get a little too self-referential at the end, this is one that works because it's also maybe the funniest entry in the franchise. I think that Jack Quaid really does add a real spark here, and I love how they play that angle of fans turned psychos. And I have no comments on fan bases that I think they may be addressing or referencing, but Scream 5 was such a surprise to me. I mean, I was always going to support it. I was always going to check it out. But the fact that it really became that entertaining, I was pleasantly surprised. And I'm so glad that the directors here from Radio Silence are making this franchise their own. Coming in at number 2 is Scream 2. If Scream 3 has one of my favorite openings of the franchise as far as the opening kill itself and who it is, I love the fact that the Scream 2 opening has become something that has been parodied elsewhere, like in Scary Movie. I really like how they continue with Sidney trying to move on from the events of the first film. I like the fact that they really raise the stakes by taking out the character of Randy, someone who I think was maybe my favorite character coming out of the first film. And I also like the fact that they really try to level up that relationship between Dewey and Gale. And while the killer reveal in Scream 2 is kind of whatever in retrospect, I do really enjoy the fact that they do play on the expectation of whether it will or will not be Cotton. I thought that was a good move. But of course, coming in at number 1 is the original film. I think that Wes Craven at that point in his career he was already a Hall of Famer as far as horror filmmakers at that point. So for him to come out with Scream and for it to maybe be his sort of definitive mark on the horror franchise, both in its commentary on the genre, but in the fact that this was just a genuinely good mystery slasher film. Every time I watch this movie, I don't care what part of the movie it's on, I will watch it all the way through. And when you have characters like Billy Loomis and Stu Macher who are just going full-blown psychotic at the end, I mean, that's the great stuff. I mean, who could deny it? And obviously, as this franchise has continued, no one has quite left a mark like Billy and Stu, to the point where fans are still secretly hoping that Stu Macher might be alive somewhere out there. I really hope that they don't go that route, but I understand why, because Billy and Stu especially, are the best. And introducing us to Sidney Prescott and helping to define a new final girl for this generation hats off to Wes Craven. He's directed my favorite horror movie of all time, A Nightmare on Elm Street, but the success that he had with the Scream series is... I mean, he had already had a Hall of Fame career before that, and this is just like, oh yeah, we'll do a second Hall of Fame ceremony for him at this point. But that's my list. I would love to hear yours, so shout at me in the comments below. What did you think of Scream 6? What is your ranking of the Scream franchise? Does anyone out there actually think Scream 3 is great? Curious. I'm sure someone out there does. But if you like this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. If you have not already, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. That way you can stay up to date with everything going on here. Once again, my name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Stay sweaty, my friends. I will see you at the movies. Peace.